We begin the current Daf from Mesechta Chagigah Daf test. We begin the 4 lines down at the top of the Yomit. We continue the halacha, the next Mishnah, continuing on the theme of our Parak, our Mesechta, Kol Chayov Re'iyah, which is the title of Mesechta Chagigah. Basically, these two karbanos, like Chagigah and Re'iyah, which are brought in the Yom Tov, and we continue to explain the halachic parameters of these karbanos. Shish Kosmans B'Kalzich and Cheskot Tanita. Mishnah is doing today's Daf. Some of these we're discussing today's Daf are Tashlumin. Someone doesn't bring the Karban Chagigah, as we explained in the previous Daf, it's for Chagois and Oisoi. Karban Chagigah is supposed to be brought on the first day of Yom Tov. If someone doesn't bring it on the first day, can he bring it on the other days of Yom Tov? When the Gemara brings a machlekes, this halacha of Tashlumin, is it Tashlumin Derishin? Are all the other days of Yom Tov, all the 7-8 days, are they to make up your obligation of the first day? Or are they Tashlumin Zelazeh? Are actually each day making up the previous day's Chiyuv, which was making up for the day before that? Nazar to Nitma, the Gemara discussed regarding a Nazar. If he becomes a tummy mess, so he brings a carbon after he becomes tar, and then he begins his Nazirs again. So the Gemara discusses cases, if let's say he was table for his tumah, and then he became tummy again that night or the next day, before he even brought his karbanos for that tumah, whether he needs to bring two separate karbanos after he becomes tar, because he became tummy again after he was already tar, but he didn't yet bring his karbanos. Movus lo yochel iskoin, v'chesaron lo yochel imanis. The Gemara brings several examples of averes that cannot be fixed. And ein adayim l'shayna pirka mea pamim l'shayna pirka mea be'echad. The Gemara brings a famous teaching that you can't compare someone who reviews his learning 100 times to someone who reviews his learning 101 times. To begin the current Daf test, 4 lines down at the top of the Yomit. Again, like we said, we continue on the theme of this carbon of Chagigah. It says the Mishnah, Mi shaloi chag. Someone who did not bring his carbon Chagigah b'Yom Tov Rishon Shachag, on the first day of the Yom Tov. Okay, although you're supposed to, it's supposed to be on the first day, but Chagigah is called a regal. You could continue bringing your Chagigah and make it up all Yom Tov. And even the Yom Tov Achan Shachag, even the last day of Sukkot, which is Shmini Atzeres, although technically Shmini Atzeres is a regular for the Asma, it's its own Yom Tov, but it's also Tashlum Derishin. You can also make up for the Chagigah that you didn't bring on the first day of Sukkot. Now, let's say the Yom Tov already passed and you did not bring Chagigah at all. Then says the Mishnah, you're not responsible anymore. And Al Zen, regarding this, is a passing in Keheles, Mu'uvis L'yochel Liskon. Something crooked cannot be fixed. The Chesroin L'yochel Limanis. Something that's missing, you cannot be counted on anymore. It's already over and bottled. Now, Rav Shimon Asiyam, he says, no, actually, the pasuk that you brought for this halacha of not bringing the Karban Chagigah, he disagrees. He says, what's considered something crooked that cannot be fixed? He says, that refers to someone who had relations with a forbidden woman to him, and he gave birth to an illegitimate child, where he brought in someone invalid to the Jewish people, and therefore that's always going to be recalling his sin. Which, as Taisus says, he says, there's a greater embarrassment because that mamzer is always there. But let's say other sins, let's say someone's a ritzach and he murdered someone, or he's a gazan, but the witnesses are not constantly saying, because that person's dead and that money's already gone. But a mamzer is something that cannot be fixed. It's something that will always testify regarding, and therefore that's why his sin is not erased with tshuva, because there's a constant reminder of his sin over there in the world. Because imtam, because if you're going to say regarding robbing or stealing, yachalu lachzirin, he can return the money that he stole and what he robbed to the owners, be sakin, and he can fix it, and he'll be cleansed from sin. But a mamzer has nothing to do. That sin is always there in the world. Shimon Yochim, he gives a different interpretation. He says, no, ein kaychen mu'uvis. You don't call something distorted. Distortion means there was something here that was straight and that was twisted. So ve'ezeh, so what's that considered? This is what's called shon parish. Someone who was a Talmid Chacham, but he removed himself in the ways of Torah. That's mu'uvis, because mu'uvis is that it was straight and then you twisted it, and that's why such a person cannot come back and be fixed. So the Gemara goes back to the opening halacha of the Mishnah. From where do we know that the last day of Sukkot could make up for the karbanos of the individual of his Chagigah from the first day? So Rabbi Shloimy says, I'll tell you what. Nemet says over here in Devarim Atzeres, the word Atzeres is B'Shvi Shel Pesach. In Devarim Tezayin, it says by the Parsha Kol HaMachar, it says 6 days you can eat matzahs, and on the 7th day is going to be Atzeres. Now, and the Nemet says on the Yikra Atzeres, says the same word B'Shmini Shel Chag, on the 8th day of Sukkot. And the reason why it says Atzeres is because Chol HaMoed Yeh do Malacha, and Atzeres is like gathering yourself in, containing yourself, not do Malacha. But by both of them it says the word Atzeres. Malal, just like with the Shvi Shel Pesach. L'tashlumin, you can make up for the first day of Pesach because there's no difference between the Shvi Shel Pesach and the first day of Pesach. So Avkan l'tashlumin, so to over here, Shmini Atzeres, this that it's separated from the first days is only regarding, as the Gemara tells us later on the Yudzayin, regarding Pizar Kishab. For 6 things we consider Shmini Atzeres different. But regarding Tashlumin, we learn from Atzeres itself, it's just like over the Shvi Shel Pesach, you can make up, so to here, the 8th day of Sukkot. Says the Gemara comments on this answer. Mufne, this Gezeira Shava of Atzeres must be what's called superfluous words. Has to be extra. So then you cannot ask any more question because any Gezeira Shava that the words are extra, so you can learn out from it and you can't ask questions. Because the Ilav Mufne, if these words weren't extra and they're used for their context, you're just saying, oh, it has the same word, then you could ask, and I do have a question on this Gezeira Shava. Because Malish Vishal Pesach, the 7th day of Pesach. Yeah, of course you could make Tashlum. There's no difference in halacha between the last day of Pesach and the first day of Pesach. So therefore it could be Tashlumin. But what are you going to compare to the 8th day of Sukkot? There's 6 differences that it has. It has its own name, it has its own carbonas. So how could you learn out Shmini Shal Sukkot from the Shvi Shal Pesach? So he says, yeah, the truth is you're right. These words of Atzeres are superfluous, and therefore you can't ask questions on this Gezeira Shava because the Torah is obviously telling you a message by the similar words. Because let's see, my Atzeres. What does it mean, the word Atzeres? It means Atzu Basis Malach. It means containing yourself from doing work, and that's what we're telling you on Shvi Shel Pesach and Shmini Shel Sukkot. Although you're doing Malach until now, you can't do Malach anymore. The problem is, like Sibba says in that same pasuk, Lisasa Malacha. In that pasuk it says, "Yomei Shvi Atzeres l'Shem Hakecha lo yisasa malacha." So Atzeres the Kazach Manalamali. He already said lo yisasa malacha. What do you think the word Atzeres? No, rather obviously he's coming to Lafnuya that the word is extra to compare Shmini Shel Sukkot to Shvi Shel Pesach to say that it has the halacha of Teshuvah. Now that was the source of Rabbi Yochanan. But Tana Maisi L'Mahacha. Atana, and like Rashi, the reason why we're saying Atana is because Rabbi Yochanan, who was the first pshat, he's an Amayra. So we're saying, but Atana learns out from a different source, this halacha of how you could even have Tashlumin on the 8th day of Sukkot on Shmini Atzeres. Atana like learn on Brisa. Says the pasuk, that you're going to celebrate, bring a Chagigah for Hashem on the Yom Tov of 7 days. Now, if you just read the pasuk simply, it would sound like you bring the Chagigah all 7 days every single day. It says in the singular, no, but the first day of Yom Tov, you're going to celebrate with a Chagigah. But you don't bring a Chagigah every 7 days of the all 7 days of the Yom Tov. Now, in Canada, that's the case. Then why does it say 7 if it's only with first day? L'tashlumin, to say that you can make it up. How do you know if you didn't bring on the first day of Sukkot? That you could go ahead and continue making it up the whole Yom Tov after even the last day of Yom Tov, meaning Shmini Atzeres. Because it says in the pasuk over there, it says in the 7th month you should celebrate it, which sounds like that every Yom Tov in the 7th month could say in the 7th month. So every Yom Tov in the 7th month you could make it up, including the next Yom Tov right after Sukkot, which is Shmini Atzeres. Now, but if all we had was the word in the 7th month, you would think to say that actually you could celebrate with the Chagigah any day of the month to make it up. If you didn't bring it in during the Yom Tov, you can make it up until the end of the month. So therefore had to say oisai at the end of the pasuk. It says 2 oisais to tell you oisai at the Chagigah. No, only on the Yom Tov you could celebrate the Chagigah. But you cannot make it up beyond the Yom Tov. But therefore, that's another source that you see that all the Yom Tovim in the Chodesh Hashvi, including Shmini Atzeres, can be used to make up as Tashlumin if you didn't bring the carbon on the first day of Sukkot. So those are 2 different sources for this halacha of our Mishnah. The Tashlumin, the halacha Tashlumin, and they could even be for Shmini Atzeres. Now, says the Gemara, my Tashlumin. In other words, how does Tashlumin work? What's the mechanics of Tashlumin? So we already brought this machlekes previously in this Masechta. It says Tashlumin l'rishon. The thing is that the first day of Yom Tov was the primary halacha of bring the Chagigah. Like it says, it. Now, all the days after it, the whole Yom Tov, are all making up for that first day. Whereas Rabbi Shloimy says, no, Tashlumin zeh lazeh. No, he says there is no one day that its obligation is not independent on its own. If for someone that didn't bring it the previous days. So the first day, you're able to bring it, that's primary for that. the day after that is making up for the previous day, but every day is making up the day beforehand. It's not only making up for the first day. So the Gemara says, "My benai." What's in between these two interpretations? Rabbi Zeir says, "Chigur b'yom rishon." If someone was lame on the first day of Sukkot of Yom Tov, where he's not fit, as we had said in the Mishnah, in the opening Mishnah of Masechta, a lame is one of those individuals not chayv re'iyah. Then minispash b'yom sheni. Then he healed on the second day of Yom Tov. That's the difference between them, as the Gemara explains. He says that all the days are making up for the first day. Once he was not fit on the first day, not fit on the second day. In other words, there's no chiyuv here at all. There's no tashlim, nothing to make up. You were not a bar chiyuva. Whereas Rabbi Shloimy says tashlim is elzeh. Every day is making up the day before that. Even though you weren't fit on the first day, it's fit on the second day. So you can bring it on the third day to make up the second day, even though you weren't fit on the first day, because it's not totally dependent just on the first day. Every day has so chiyuv, and therefore that would be the nafkamina. If someone's not roy on day one, but it's the roy on day two, if he would bring his carbon Chagigah or not. Now it gets a little bit more complicated in cheshbon. So that's what we're saying. We're saying, according to Rabbi Yechanan, they're all tashlum and l'rishon. Ask the Gemara, Miyam and Rabbi Yechanan really say this, that if you're not row on day one, then you're not going to bring it on day two. It's not going to be tashlumin if you weren't row. But V'amar Chizkiah says, and this is brought in creases Daf Tes in the Mishnah, a nazir brings a carbon even for many tumas, but if he became tamei, he's going to bring one carbon. Chizkiah says that nitma b'yoyim. If let's say he became tamei, that's during his tumah. If he becomes tamei, doesn't make a difference until he purifies himself. He's going to bring one carbon for all those tumas, and then when he does, he'll start over his nazirs. But let's say he becomes tummy on day 8, meaning when a person becomes tummy, he has to go through a 7-day purification process and then be matar. On day 8, he's already fit to bring the karbanas of tumah. There's two different karbanas. A nazir brings when he's done with his nazirs, and also when he becomes tummy, he has to go through a special purification process. So on day 8, he's already fit to bring karbanas and start over his nazirs. Now, what happens is that the days that he had counted of his nazirs, let's say he had a nazirs for 100 days, and he was already 50 days into the nazirs, so he becomes tummy, all those 50 days go out the door, you got to start over his nazirs. Like it says in the pasuk, on day 8 of his purification from the tumah that he became tummy, he brings 2 tairim or 2 b'nei yaina, and then he starts over his nazirs and the yom rishon yiplu. Okay, so Chizkiah says, if he becomes tummy on day 8, so halach is, then he's going to have to bring a carbon on the second tumah that he would get on day 8, because he was already chayiv in the carbon tumah, and he already technically started a second naziris on day 8, even though he didn't bring the carbon yet. So therefore, this is essentially a second tumah. So that's what the Chizkiah says. If you become tummy on day 8, then you got to bring another carbon for that tumah, because you already finished that first. It's not like the same. You'll bring one carbon for all the tumas. It's another chiyuv because you already started new naziris. You became tummy again, even though you didn't bring your carbon yet. Now, but let's say balayla. Let's say he became tummy on the night of the 8th day. So he already went through his 7 days of purification, but he didn't come to day 8, which is to bring the carbon. This is one mechutz kapar. You have to bring a carbon on the 8th. So then, maybe. No, then you're not going to bring 2 carbonas. You're going to bring just 1 carbon. Why? Because you never really left your first tumah to a moment when you were fit to bring a carbon. So you really technically were not chayiv in your first carbon yet, so therefore, there's no tashlumin. There's no making up for it, because you never really had the chiyuv yet. Right? That's what Chizkiah says. But Rabbi Yechanan, and he's the main one that we want to ask from, because we just quoted Rabbi Yechanan before, he says no. He says, since you already toiled for your first tumah, and you already had Harav Shemesh, you already had sundown, so you already purified yourself from the first tumah, so he says, Av b'layla nami maybe. Even at nighttime of the 8th day, if you became tummy then, you're going to have a chiyuv of a carbon already from the first one, even though nighttime is not fit for a carbon. Ooh, so you see, even though you're not row for a carbon on the night of the 8th day, there has tashlumin for it. You're going to have to make it up. You're not bringing it right now because you became tummy. But you're going to have to make up, besides the carbon that you're going to have for the new tumah, you're going to have to make up for this. But what do you mean make up? I wasn't row for carbon yet. Rabbi Yechanan we just quoted as saying before that the nafkamina between his pshat and the other pshat, if it's tashlum derishon or tashlum zelazeh, is going to be if someone was a chigur v'nispashid. I told you there's a little bit of a cheshbon over here. Chigur v'nispashid, someone was lame and then they got healed. So he said the nafkamina is, according to Rabbi Yechanan, not going to be able to make it up. Why not? Because you weren't row as a chigur. So what's this bringing tashlum on the other days of the Yom Tov? You weren't row. But what do you mean? Rabbi Yechanan himself said that af balayla nami maybe. The nazir that became tummy on the night of the 8th day, is he rowed to bring a carbon yet? Is he rowed? You can't bring a carbon at nighttime. You can only bring it during the daytime. So it's only chal on the day on the day of the 8th day. So what's this when he becomes tummy on the night? It's not rowed to bring a carbon. And still you tell me he's going to have to make it up. He's going to have to bring another carbon for that. But say, I was never rowed to bring a carbon. So you see, even if he's not rowed, there could be halach of tashlumin.
The word is not if he's rowed. The word is if his new disease started already.
Yeah, so it technically did start. He already finished his tahara. He's already pure.
At night.
Yeah, he's already pure.
So why doesn't he have to be
That's the machlokes chizkei and Rabbi Yechanan on some level. And Rabbi Yechanan saying, "Adaf bring it," but he can't. I mean, he's tummy now. He started a new tumah already. He became tummy in the 9th and 8th day, so he's got to go over 7 days of tahara again, right? He's have to bring a carbon for that one. But what's with that first tumah that he had? Yeah, you're gonna have to make that up. What do you make it up? Make up what? I was never rowed to bring a carbon. You see, even though you're not rowed, you could have to bring a carbon. So why is that any different than when a chigur v'nispashid? We wasn't rowed, but yeah, you can still make it up. So it seems to be a stira in how you explaining Rabbi Yechanan. Yeah, as everyone with me, it's a little bit of a cheshbon. But Rabbi Yomi even gives the answer. He says, Shani Tumah. He says, it's a good question, but Tumah is different. Meaning, a carbon that gets rejected because of Tumah, yes, there's going to be tashlumin. You'll be able to make it up. This Nazir became Tumah in the 9th and the 8th day after he purified himself, before he was able to bring his carbon. You can be able to make it up, even though you weren't fit to bring it. Why? Because since the Yeshla Tashlumin b'Pesach Sheni, a very interesting raya, there's a halacha if someone became Tumah by Pesach Rishon. It's a halacha that you could bring Pesach Sheni, right? We all know Pesach Sheni, you bring it a month later if someone was Tumah. Now, because this guy was not fit, he was not rowed to bring a carbon by Pesach, because he was Tumah. And yet still we see that he could, quote, make it up, he could have Tashlumin on Pesach Sheni. So you see there's a precedent in the laws of Tumah that you can make up something even though you weren't rowed. That's what the whole halacha of Pesach Sheni is. You're making up for something that you were not rowed for. But someone who gets rejected for something else, like a chigur, like a lame person, we don't find that you could have Tashlumin unless you were rowed to bring it. Interesting answer. So the Gemara is saying it's a good question. You're right. Do you have to be rowed for Tashlumin? Seems to be a stira. You're right, it's a good question. But I find a precedent by Tumah that you could have Tashlumin even though you're not rowed. But like we find by Pesach Sheni, that's going to be the same thing that we're saying regarding this halach of the Nazir. The Nazir became Tumah the night of the 8th day, although technically it wasn't rowed. What do you mean I have to make it up when I finish this next Tumah that I'm just became Tumah now? I have to bring 2 karbons. What do I have to bring it for? Yeah, it's a good question. He's not rowed. But you see, there's such a halacha by Tumah and carbon that there would be Tashlumin even though you're not rowed. Now, Masal Rav Papa, again, it's a lot of cheshbon over here, so another question on this. Rav Papa asked on this what you just said. But this answer you're giving is only good according to which the machlokes and Pesachim, the Tzaddikim and Aleph. Pesach, as we continue to Beis, Sheni, the Pesach Sheni that's brought in Iyar is Tashlum Derishon. There's a machlokes how you qualify the Yom Tov Pesach Sheni. If you say it's what's making up Pesach Rishon and Nafkamin that the Gemara talks about, if someone becomes an adult, becomes a ger between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, is it making up? So according to the one that says he's making it up, so good, you have a good raya. Even though you're not fit, but you could have Tashlumin. According to the one that says that no, Pesach Sheni is its own independent Yom Tov. So then, Michael, what are you going to say? Now you cannot explain the reasoning of Rabbi Yechanan because you find a precedent by Tumah that you could have Tashlumin by Pesach Sheni even though you weren't fit by Rishon because Pesach Sheni is not a Tashlumin. It's its own independent Yom Tov. You didn't have it for a Pesach Rishon. You bring Pesach Sheni. It's not making it up. So then you're back to the question. So you don't find such a precedent. You don't find such a raya that by Tumah we're going to have a Tashlumin even though you weren't rowed. So how do you explain then the stira of Rabbi Yechanan regarding the chigur and nispashid and regarding the nazir that became tamei on Leil Shemini? So I'll have this the Gemara a different shot. So forget about what we just said. The Gemara comes up with a new angle to explain and answer the question. I'm going to pop it. It says, Ksav Rabbi Yechon held, Laila in mechusas man. Nighttime is not considered like as if you're lacking having reached the time of bringing the carbon. In other words, when you are at the night of the 8th day, which you're going to be able to bring the karbanos that next morning, it's like you already reached the 8th day. So therefore, you are mechuyev already in the carbon. It's just that technically, because it's nighttime, you just can't bring it. So it's not like you weren't row, you were row. But just a technicality, you just can't bring it. But in contrast to the case of a chigur b'yerish, someone who's lame on the first day of Yom Tov, he does not have any obligation of re'iyah. So you can't have a tashlum of his you never had an obligation for. So this is a new approach the Gemara is taking. The stira was, you're telling me Rabbi Yechon holds that since he holds it's called tashlum derishin. If someone is lame on the first day, which does not have a chigur re'iyah, that when he's in the spashal b'yem sheni, he's not going to make it up in contrast to Rabbi Ishia. So we asked, but I mean, what you find by Nasser that he holds that you could have a tashlum and not row? It's not true. You are row because he holds it's not considered mechusas man. You reached the 8th day. Now technically it's nighttime, so you can't bring it, but you are a bar chiyuva, and therefore you can be able to make it up when you finish that second series and you retire yourself from that. You're going to bring a karman for that first one too. But wait, we're not done with the cheshbon. Did Rabbi Yechon really say what you're answering, that Laila is not mechutzas man, that reaching the night of the day, because we know in Jewish law, the day starts with the nighttime, so you already came to the 8th day, but just, you can't technically bring it because the nighttime, Rabbi Yechon really holds like that, what you just said? But for Rabbi Yechon, again, there's more cheshbon. Rabbi Yechon says, in a different context of halacha, a zav has the halacha that when he has certain discharges for a certain amount of time, he has to count Shiva Nikiyim. He has to count 7 clean days. We know that the women do this. The men also had this in biblical law. And after 7 clean days, he toivels and he has sundown. Okay, says Rabbi Yechon, I want to tell you the following case. Let's say after his 7 days of cleaning himself up, which again, he's one of those that's mechusik kippurim, he has to bring a carbon after the 7 clean days on the 8th day. So let's say after the 7 days, he already had 7 clean days, no discharges. He had Herav Shemesh sundown, and then Ra'achas Balayim. The night of the 8th day, he had 1 discharge, and the following day, the next morning, he has 2 discharges, which 3 discharges are what makes him into a zav, to bring karbanos. So the halacha is maybe he has to bring a carbon for the second tumah, besides for the carbon he has to bring for the first being a zav. And he's going to have to bring 2 karbanos when he purifies himself. Why? Since he didn't see the second one, until he came to a time when he was fit to bring a carbon, so that will have tashlumin. You're going to make that up when you finish with the second ziva, then you'll bring 2 karbanos. Now, that he's also going to have to bring for the second one, even though that second becoming a zav started in the beginning of when he was still obligated in the first carbon, we don't say it's one big tumah. And Rabbi Yosef explains in Masechtas increases the reason for this is because since the first discharge of a zav is really technically like just keri ba'alma. There's different halachas. Keri is just a seminal discharge, and ziva discharge is a much different type of a discharge than the keri. But in halacha, we consider the first ziva like just like as keri ba'alma. So that's not really considered a significant discharge, that first one. Now, when he sees another discharge, it combines together. So here also, even though the first discharge of the second zav, meaning after he finishes Shiva Nikiyim, and then on night of the 8th, he saw 1, and then in the day of the 8th, he saw 2 more, just like in general, even though the first discharge really is not significant, it's like Keri Ba'alma, still it combines with the remaining 2. So to over here, even though the first one was really during the time of the first carbon, because it wasn't yet the 8th day to be able to bring the carbon, so it was still within the time frame before you even obligated for the first carbon to be like as if you finished that already and you're starting a new one. Still, when you see the other 2 the next day, it will combine with the first one, even though it was still within the time frame of the first carbon's chiyuv, because you didn't even come to the time that you could have even brought the first carbon. That's one case Rabbi Yechon says. Now, a different case, similar but different, is not 1 at night and 2 a day, but rather shtayim b'layla v'achas b'yom. Someone had 2 discharges at the night of the 8th day, and then he has the 3rd one the next morning. Then ain't maybe. Then you're not going to bring 2 karbanos. Now, and the reason that is simply because you saw those 2 at nighttime. When you can't say that you're going to have another chiv of ziva because it was within the time of still the first one. It's like one big ziva. Because although Shivin Akim, if you on day 7 of Shivin Akim have a discharge, you just demolished your whole Shivin Akim, and it's not like you're a second ziva. Yeah, you have to start over. It's still one long one. Here also, even though you finish 7, you already had tefillah, you already had Erev Shemesh, but it's only over when you bring the carbon. And you didn't bring the carbon, you didn't come to the time that you bring the carbon. So when you have 2 at nighttime, okay, then there's only 1 the next day, that's not going to be significant enough. 2 the next day is significant enough. Because the first one, anyway, generally like Keri Ba'alma and insignificant, and we still combine the heroes. If it's within the time frame, the first one will still combine. Okay, says the Gemara like this. If you entertain to say, like Rabbi Shloimy holds, as you just wanted to say in your previous answer, that Laila in the Mechuz's man, when you reach the night of the 8th day, you're like there already. You're not missing anything. You're like already Bar Chiyuva, you're already finished. You're done with the first one. You just maybe didn't technically bring your car, but you're done already. It's not Mechuz's man. Then I don't understand. Then even if you had 2 discharges on the night of the 8th day and 1 during the daytime, and Rashi adds on, truth is the Gemara could have said, even if you saw all 3 at nighttime, you already finished the first Zman. And these are 2 different zivas. So maybe he should have to bring a carbon for that first one and for the second one. But only if not what? That he holds Laila is Mechuz's man. Nighttime is not, you're not there yet. So therefore, if you would see 2 at nighttime, it's like a ziva richt, it's like 1 long ziva. So that contradicts what you just said before. You just said a moment ago to answer the contradiction of how do we resolve this theory in Rabbi Yechon regarding the Chigr and the Spashit, regarding the Nazir who becomes Tamei in the night of the 8th day, that you said, not a stira. Chigr and the Spashit is not row at all. The Nazir becomes Tamei in the night of the 8th day, he is row because Laila is not Mechuz's man. So he's already row, and therefore we're going to consider as he has to make up tashluma for that. How could you say that Rabbi Yechon holds Laila is La Mechuz's man? How do you understand this halacha Rabbi Yechon? How could he say that if you saw after the Zav had his Shivin Akiyim 2 discharges on the night of the 8th day, that then it's like 1 long ziva and it's not a separate chiyuv? Why isn't it a separate chiyuv? You told me Laila is not Mechuz's man. You already finished with the first one. And you're ready with Mechuyev, the moment it gets Seisek HaChavim on the night of the 8th day, you're ready with Mechuyev in the first one. Now it's a new Chiyev. So why are you telling me if 2 at nighttime, then no, it's not a new Chiyev, and it's the same old one? Obviously, Hoz Laila is Mechuz's man. So that contradicts what you said before. Says the Gemara, no, it's not difficult. Why? Kikam Rabbi Yechon, when did Rabbi Yechon say that halacha was L'divrei ha'omer Laila Mechuz's man? He was saying it according to the one who holds that nighttime is, you're still not there yet. Because you can't bring up brothers at nighttime. But according to him, he holds Laila is not Mechuz's man. And even if you would see all 3 discharges at nighttime, yeah, Rabbi Yechon himself would hold that you would bring another carbon for those 3 at nighttime. He was only going according to that man who holds it is Mechuz's man. So the Gemara says, wait, the Cheshbon continues. Wait a second. If you're going to say that Rabbi Yechon is saying his own reasoning, he's going in his own opinion, he would be telling us a chiddush that he holds that Laila is Mechuz's man. And that would be the purpose of telling us the halacha of 2 at nighttime and 1 a day doesn't work, because you'd be telling me that Laila is Mechuz's man. But frek the Gemara, L'divrei ha'omer, you tell me he's saying according to the one who holds it's Mechuz's man? And then Pshita, obviously, it's Mechuz's man. So if you see 2 at nighttime, what would the chiddush in that halacha be to tell it to me? If you tell me that halacha, so that lets me know that that's what you hold, that's the chiddush hagufa. But if you're saying only according to the one who holds like that, well, obviously, the Laila Mechuz's man, then you didn't get there yet, and you see 2 at nighttime, which is the bulk of it. Of course, it's not going to be a separate chiyuv. So what's the chiddush then? Says the Gemara, you're right. The chiddush is not. There's no chiddush in the halacha of 2 at night and 1 a day. It's shtayim bayayim achas balayla. The case of when there's 2 in the next day and 1 of the previous day, that's Isra. That was the case Rabbi Yechon had to tell us according to that mandam. Why? Because so good that the Yehuda thought to say that you would be bothered by the, like the question that Rav Shesha Bar Idi asked there in Masechtas Krisis, that he asked on the reasoning that Rav Yosef explained, like we mentioned before, that says yes, Rabbi Yosef had said that just like every first discharge of a zav, although technically we treat it like keri ba'alma, but when you see then another two discharges, we combine it with it, even though technically it's not really so significant. So Rabbi Yossi said here also it's no different. Although you're right, the first one is within the time frame because Laila is Mechuzas Zman. Of the first one, still, since the remaining two are the next day already, so they're going to drag the first one with it. On that, Rav Shesha asked something increased. He says, can you compare them? Over there, when even though the first Riyah is Keri Ba'alma, but it's at a time of Chiyuva. Here, the first one is not at a time of Chiyuva. How could you combine that first one, even though technically we combine Keri Ba'alma to the next two to make it into a Zav, but here it's at a time of the first Chiyuv. How can you drag that first one of the night to the two of the daytime? And therefore that would have bothered you. Kamash Malon Rabbi Yosef, that's what Rabbi Yosef is going to tell you. Like Rabbi Yosef holds that no, it is going to be able to drag that first one that was still at the night of the 8th day. And that's the Chiddush of the man da'ama Mechuzas Zman, that's still going to work even though it's Mechuzas Zman. For the case of Achas Balayla V'Shtay B'Yom. But you're right, the case of Shtayim Balayla, the Achas B'Yom, there's no Chiddush at all, because obviously the whole Laila Mechuzas Zman is not going to work. And therefore that's how we resolve, ultimately we come out, that the way we meyasher the steer Rabbi Yechanan is that Rabbi Yechanan himself holds Laila is Lav Mechuzas Zman. And therefore he holds by the case of by the Nazir Shenitma Balel Sheni, he actually will have a separate chiyuv. He's in a row, and Rabbi Yechanan holds that when you're not row like Chigigah in this Bashid, because he holds the Kamen Chagigah is Tashlum and Larishon, you're not going to be able to bring a Kamen the rest of the Yom Tov because you could only have a Tashlum if you're Bar Chiyuv if you're row. Yes, but since he holds that Laila is Lav Mechuzas Zman, the Nazir that became Tomei on the 8th day was actually a Bar Chiyuv. He just technically couldn't end up bringing it because he never reached it to the next day, and then he becomes Tomei, he's going to start over again, because you have to bring two Karbanos of Tahara because he was row. Because Laila Lav Mechuzas Zman, it's not considered as if he never came to that chiyuv. That's the end of that discussion. Nothing more goes back to the halacha of the Mishnah. We said, okay, there's halacha, although primarily everyone agrees you're supposed to bring the Chagigah on the first day of Yom Tov, but then there's this halacha of Tashlum, and you can make it up, the whole Yom Tov, even Shemini Atzeres. But then the Mishnah said, let's say the whole Yom Tov passed, and you didn't bring the Korban Chagigah, then you're not responsible to ensure this anymore. Regarding this, it says, something that's crooked you cannot fix, something that's missing you cannot be counted in anymore. Now, says the Gemara the following question. Omalei bar hei lehil. So bar hei, I think most people only know him from a song. So Taisa interesting says, where did he get the name bar hei? Is that he was a ger. And the gerim, we always call him Ben Avraham and Sarah, because they were the first ger and the Megari people. So interesting, Avraham had a hay, and so did Sarah, the hay had it on, because her name was Sarai, and then called Sarah, and Avraham was Avram, add on the hay. So Ben Hey, he's the son of Hey, the Hey of Avram, and the Hey is Sarah, he's the son. And so too Ben Bagbag, I think also people know from the song, is that the it's also Bag is Gematria of Hey. So Ben Bagbag was also the same thing of Beis and Gimel is 2 and 3 is 5. He's also the same thing as Bar Hey. That was a way of saying that they were Gerim, they were sons of Avram and Sarah, who had Hay's add on to the name. But being that as a name, Bar Hey, it says to Hillel, what, this word doesn't seem to be correct. What do you mean? A lacking that cannot be counted? It should say that it cannot be filled. If you're talking about a chisar and a lacking, so the terminology that would be correct would be miloi, filling it up. If you're missing a mitzvah, you cannot fill it up anymore once it's missing because then you have to do another mitzvah. But what's this lihimanis to be counted? Ella, rather, what is the pshat of the pasuk? It means zeshe minuhu chaveir of ledvar mitzvah. If his friends were counting on him for a dvar mitzvah, they said, come, let's go. And he's not counting with them and he doesn't go. So it comes out that he's lacking from that counting, from that minyan. Oh, that he cannot be counted with them anymore. And they're counting because they already did the mitzvah without him. So that's why it says, Lo yochel lihimanis. It was about being counted to join us in this mission, and he didn't. Therefore it says, Lo yochel lihimanis. It says in the Brisa, and it says in the pasuk that something crooked cannot be fixed. This refers to someone that missed out on Kriya Shema in the morning, or Kriya Shema Shal Arvis, or Kriya Shema in the evening, or he didn't daven Shachris, or Tefillah Shal Arvis, or Ma'ariv, which Taisa points out seemingly would be like the man the holds Ma'ariv is a chayva, but it says Taisa even the man the Ma'ariv is Rishus, which again we don't paskin like that in a technical way, but he says still, Bechinim en lon levatla. even so, for no good reason, you shouldn't be mavatal, if not through at least some oinus ksa. So either way, a person should be davening, and if he misses a davening, so that's movas leichaliska, and you can't. It's already something that's crooked. You cannot make it up. It's already gone, and you can't make it up. The chesaron leichalimons, when it says there's something lacking that you cannot be counted on it, it says shenimnu chavei l'dvar mitzvah, like we explained. That's with Satan Amahachi. This is when his friends are counted for dvar mitzvah. It's not counted with them anymore. It's a whole list of people who's going to give to this organization, or they're going to go to that Ma'ara, to that Kever, to that Tzaddik, whatever it is. They're not counted with them. That's what this pasuk is referring to. And Amalei, once we mentioned Bar Hei to Hill, so the Gemara brings another teaching. Amalei Bar Hei Hill. Bar Hei said to Hill, Ma'idich said, what's in the pasuk in Malachi? It says, B'shavtim Re'isim, you're going to return, you're going to see. Ben Tzadik LaRosh, the difference between a righteous person and a wicked person. Ben Oived Elokim LaShaloya Badu, to someone who serves God and someone who doesn't serve God. Now it seems redundant, because Hainu Tzadik, Hainu Oived Elokim, isn't the Tzadik the one who serves God? It's the same thing. And Hainu Rasha, Hainu Shaloya Badu, the wicked is the one that doesn't serve God. Somebody says no. Hill says, Avodoi v'loy avodoi, when the pasuk is referring to one who serves God or doesn't serve God, Tarvai tzadiki gemurin. They're both totally righteous people. Now, so what does that mean? So who's the one who serves God and doesn't serve God if they're both tzaddikim? Because you cannot compare someone who learns his learning 100 times to someone who learns what he learned 101 times. So although they're both righteous, they don't serve God equally. The one who learned 101 times, he served God greater. He says to him, for one time that he didn't review his learning, you call him Ashaloy that he doesn't serve God? Amalei says, yes, I'll explain to you the muscles. Say Lamad, go and learn Mishuk Shel Chavan from the marketplace of the donkey drivers. Let's say a Soda Parsi. Let's say you call the donkey Uber driver and you tell him you want him to schlep his donkey for a 10 parsi. So, bezuzah, he's going to charge you 1 zuz, because that was already the cost and that was already the price that people had. Now, if you're going to tell him to go 1 more parsa, of chad esi parsi, to go for 11 parsi, betray zuzi, so we're going to ask you for 2 zuz. So you see that even though just a little bit more, okay, you ready went to the next category. So this guy did 100, which 100 is the total finale of all the numbers beneath. The moment you go to 101, a whole different category. And he's considered avade, he's considered of loy avade. Amalei Eliyahu Bar Hehe. Eliyahu said to Bar Hehe, some say, and that's why we're quoting it because Bar Hehe, and some say it was actually Eliyahu said to Rebbe Lazar. Said, Ma'idach said, wasn't in the pasuk in Yeshaya, Hine tzarafticha, behold, I have refined you, but v'lebet kasef, not like silver, meaning not in fire like the way you smelt silver in the fire. Rather, b'charticha, I have chosen you b'kur eini, in the crucible of poverty. And that's how I'm going to purify you, the Jewish people. What does this mean? So it said, Malamas comes to teach Chazak Kadosh Baruch Hu. God went around, I'll call me this taivas, for all the good attributes, I said, what can I give the Jewish people? What's a good midah that is going to be healthy for the Jewish people? The only thing he found, what's a good crucible to purify the Jewish people, is poverty. That's good for the Jewish people. Some say it was Rabbi Yisrael. I now mentioned that people say, usually poverty is beautiful for a Jew. Kibarza sumka, like a red strap, the susi chivra, like to a white horse. Which those are like a contrast. Is forgetting the word, like in the room you paint one wall and you have the other wall another color. It's good for what's that word called? Matching. It's something that's like a word that's slipped in my mind. But that's like the good contrast. This red strap on a white horse is like, it's good for a Jew. That's how beautiful it is that for the Jew to have this poverty. Now the Mishnah said, Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg said, "Is there mu'uvas lo yochel lisaken?" Recorded his opinion. He says that what's considered something that's twisted cannot be fixed. Zahabala erva. This is someone who cohabits with an erva. Gives birth to an illegitimate child. That's something you cannot fix. You can't. This is proof in the pudding that this person committed a sin, and you can't fix that. So the Gemara wonders. Sounds like Hoylid only if he gives birth to a mamzer, but lo Hoylid if it didn't give birth to mamzer, not that even though he had a ish relationship. For Tanya in the Brayse of Shimon Nasi Omer, who we just quoted from the Mishnah, he says it's his own opinion. It says going of Adam. A person steals. Okay, that's just he could give back what he stole and he could fix his ways. Goes on, a person robbed someone. Okay, that's just he could give back what he robbed and he could fix it. is, but if someone has a relationship with a married woman, he makes her forbidden to her husband, as a Eishes Ish becomes, so Nichid min ha'olam halachos. He gets chased out of the world and he's gone. He has no more way of repenting because he did something that can never be healed. Now, we're going to ask on this, but the Brisa continues. Shimon Yochim, he says, his own pshat, which we also said in the Mishnah, no one says, Baku Gamal, oh, let's check out the camel to see if it's good for the carbon today. Or Baku Chazir, let's check out the swine to see if it's good for a carbon. In other words, something that was already pre-existing as Mu'uvis, you don't call it Mu'uvis. El Baku Tala. Rather, you say, let's check out this lamb to see if it's usable for a carbon that maybe it developed a blemish and it got ruined. So too, he holds that the terminology of getting ruined is only applicable by someone that was originally good. So the says, so what's the pasuk referring to when it's Mu'uvis? It's only someone that's a Talmud Chacham, or someone that was a Talmud Chacham, that's who you're checking out, was at one point straight, Shepirish from the Torah, but if he removed himself from the Torah, that's what's considered Mu'uvis. Rabbi Shloimy he says that Kol Talmud Chacham, Shepirish from the Torah, any Talmudic scholar removed himself from the Torah, Allah Bakas Leim on him, the pasuk says in Mishlei, Ketziper Noidedis Min Kina, like a bird that wanders from its nest, Keinish Noidim Yukam Yisut, the person who wanders from his place. Like it says the pasuk in Yirmiyah, says Hashem, why did your father see me wrong? Because they distanced themselves from me, that like you guys were connected to Torah and then you're moving, that's considered shana parish. But one thing we see is Rabbi Shimon Nasi holds that it's just having relations with the Eishes Ish is really considered Mubas Leichaliskin. How come in our Mishnah he says it's only if he gave birth to a mamzer? It says it's not difficult because here in our Mishnah we're talking about where he had relations with his single sister. She's an erva, and we're talking about habala erva, but that's only a problem if he gives birth to a child. That you can't fix. But if he didn't give birth to a child, why can't it be fixed? Whereas kamba ishas ish, here in the Brisa, which erva was he talking about? He's talking about a married woman. Oh, even without giving birth to a child, there's still a recollection for his sin forever, because this woman is forever forbidden on her husband, and it doesn't make a difference if it's his sister or some other woman. She's forbidden to her husband, because a woman who has an extramarital affair becomes forbidden to her husband forever. So that's a Mubas like Chaliska. Our Mishnah said only if you give birth to a mom. So it was talking about someone who's not married, his single sister who is an heir with him, but there's no recollection to that sin unless if he gives birth to a mom. Or if you based on another approach, you could say is, no, our Mishnah and the Brisa both talking about a married woman. But the Kasha is still not difficult because Kanda the Ketim Tabu Yud and Alf is Ba'inus. In our Mishnah, we were talking about when a man raped a woman, which does not become forbidden to her husband. So therefore, only if he gave birth to a child is a Moses Leichaliskin. But if he didn't, so then there's no recollection because she's still permitted to her husband. Whereas Kam B'Ratzin, the Brisa was talking about when she had the relationship willingly, consensually, oh, then she's forbidden to her husband. So then there would be a recollection, there would be Moses Leichaliskin, even without giving birth to a child. Or if anybody another approach you could say is actually both the Mishnah and the Brisa are talking about where the man violated the woman. But the Kasha is still not difficult. Because Khan Be'esh is Kain. In the Brisa we're talking about, she's the wife of a Kain. Where even if she was violated, she's forbidden to her husband. As the Gemara says in Ksubas Dav and Alpha and Beis, the pasuk when it talks about a woman being raped, it says that meaning when actually not when she was, meaning when she was mezana, it says that she wasn't forced. So then the pasuk says she can be forbidden to her husband. But the inference is if she was forced, she can be permitted. Now which woman are we talking about? The wife of a Yisro. Because in the fact that it says he le'nitvasa, why he? He sounds like we're excluding only she, if she was not forced, can be permitted to her husband. Which is telling us that there's another woman, even if she was forced, she can be forbidden to her husband. Who is that? That's the Eish's Kain. And that's what the Brisa is talking about when she is a Mubas Leichaliskin, because even if it's Ma'anasar, she cannot stay with her husband ever again. Kamesh, it's our Mishnah was talking about the wife of a non-Kain, who only if he gives birth to a child, since she was Ma'anas, only then it's recalling it forever. But if it was not Ma'anasar, but if there's no child, then there's no recollection because she's not going to be forbidden to her husband. Now, related to this theme of a Shana Polish that we spoke about, the Gemara brings a pasuk that says, "V'lo yitzi b'labo ein shalom." So the one that goes out and the one that comes, there's no peace. It's just a pasuk in Zechariah. The Gemara is expounding it over here because not just leaving and coming, it's referring to someone who leaves the words of Torah and he comes to other words. Meaning, Shmuel Amar Rav says, what this means to say is, once a person leaves the halacha of the Mishnah and he goes downgrades Ledvar Mikra to start learning Chumash, Shuvein Lishon. So he doesn't have peace anymore. Why? Because you can't get psak from Chumash, where the Mishnah is more explicit than what's unspecified in the Torah. So someone who leaves Mishnah and he goes to Mikra, he doesn't have Shalom because he doesn't know what to do. And Shmuel, he says more than this. He says, Mishnah. This is someone who leaves Talmud to go to learn Mishnah. Meaning, Talmud, at least in the Talmudic sense, is if someone serves Talmid Chacham, who, at least in Talmudic times, what they did was they would be precise in giving explanations to the Mishnayos, to understand the Mishnayos that contradict each other, to find what's the reason why they're pater, what's the reason why there's a chiyuv, what is aser, what's mutter, because that's what's called Talmud. And if someone leaves Talmud and he goes to just primarily learn Mishnayos, so he doesn't have any more shalom in knowing what to do, because you can't really appropriately rule from Mishnayos, because there's many Mishnayos that their words are not precise, and the Gemara answers, so if you're leaving Gemara to learn Mishnayos, it's considered Ein Shalom. And one more, Rabbi Shloimy says, even if you go from Talmud Yerushalmi to learn Talmud Bavli, which is deeper, I think Gemara says that's Talmud Bavli, which that's considered that someone is also downgrading from something that he understands to something that he doesn't understand. Taisus brings that you could even say the other way around too, that even going from Talmud Bavli to Talmud Yerushalmi, because if he doesn't fully understand this, then why is he going to that? But be that as it may, if someone leaves something that he has that can give him more clarity, and he leaves something that less, that would be considered of Ein Shalom, related to the idea of Shalom Pavah, someone that knows and he leaves, that's L'yitzib L'avo Ein Shalom. Think to any time, the whole thing.